before, so I'm going to hand over to Tim to begin.
Thank you, Sue. Hello, everybody. I can't see you. It's a bit odd. I'm just going to take on faith that you're actually there. So I am Tim Sisney. I run a company called Make Work Better, and we're a consultancy who focus on well-being through the way we work. So thinking about how the way that we work, the way that we manage our work, the way that our managers manage us, affects well-being in the workplace. So this is all about, if you're a new manager, the things that might come as a bit of a shock, that will, when you start to become a manager, things that might become a bit of a shock, the things that you maybe weren't expecting, the things that are different to what you thought it was going to be, or maybe the things that just don't make any sense. Please put questions in the Q&A, and I'll check in with Sue occasionally just to see if there's any questions about stuff that I've talked about. Otherwise, we'll pick them up at the end. So yeah, meetings with your job now, I'm afraid. Let me explain a little bit about why I'm talking to you about this, I suppose. I'm talking about this because I was a terrible manager. I was really, really bad at being a manager. I had a very a straightforward job doing like computering on things, and it was great. So someone would give me some work, and I would do the work, and then I give it back to them. And I got so good at that, someone made me a manager, and I basically fell to pieces because it was no longer a case of someone gave me work and I did it and I gave it back to them and then I did the next thing. It was a case of I was now responsible for all my own work and projects. I was responsible for other people's work and projects. I was responsible for like other people, not just their work, but like who they were and like how they fitted into the organization and how they were feeling. I also had clients. I had loads of meetings, like so many meetings. And I was thinking, well, when am I going to get to do my actual job? And I went to pieces a little bit. I don't think I did right by the people who I was managing for the first couple of months. And eventually, my boss had a conversation with me. He's like, Tim, you need to work this out because you can do this, but you're not doing it very well at the minute. And it's impacting lots of other people. And it's impacting you really badly. So this is a list of things that I've learned over the time that I tried to become a better manager. And I'm definitely a better manager now. And a lot of it is because of these things I'm about to tell you about today. So the first thing is about expertise. And the thing that is most difficult to let go of when you first become a manager is the fact that before you became a manager, you were an expert in something. And it's not really, when you're a manager, it's not really your job to be the expert. It's your job to support the other people in being experts. And that's so hard to let go of. It's really, really hard to let go of. And the temptation to try to maintain your expertness can get in the way of you supporting people, asking the right questions, and bringing the most out of the people who are reporting to you. So I'm going to share the one thing that I found the most helpful in order to just get myself to a stage where I was able to just let go of my expertise a little bit. And it's very, very simple. When somebody asks you a question that you know the answer to, so say one of your line reports comes up and they ask you a question about something to do with their job, and you know the answer to that question, or at least you know what you think the answer to that question is, or maybe you just have a strong opinion about the answer to that question. Don't answer the question. Instead say, I don't know. What do you think? Awesome variation on that. It's amazing. It was the most useful piece of advice that I was ever given. And it completely changes the dynamic of the conversations that you have with those people. Because, you do know. But if you tell that person the answer to that question, you are, to start with, suggesting there's only one right answer to that question. You are not giving the opportunity for that person to work it out for themselves. And also, you're sort of training them that everything that they don't know how to do, which they might know how to do, but every question they've got, they're going to have to come to you with it. And that's the best way to give yourself like a hugely overwhelming workload, is to train the people who are now reporting to you that they absolutely need you at every stage of their working day. So I don't know, what do you think is just a brilliant way of opening up their thoughts? Because they'll have thoughts, they won't have come to you completely cold. They just maybe need permission to talk about those thoughts in a way which are unchallenging, or in a way which is safe for them to do so. So being asked, I don't know, what do you think? You're not saying what's the answer, what do you think? Let's talk about it. And also the other thing is maybe you'll learn something, and there's a weird thing that happens when you become a manager. When you think you need to know all the answers, and if you can't get out of that mindset of being the person with the expertise, you sort of sometimes stop learning. And you've got as much to learn from the people who report to you as they have from you. So I don't know. What do you think? So expertise, letting go of expertise is really, really hard. But the other thing that comes along with the whole thing in needing to let go of expertise and moving into a management role is what you sometimes get referred to as imposter phenomenon, sometimes imposter syndrome. And I'll explain why the difference in those words is important in a minute. Imposter phenomenon is a thing. It was identified in, I think, the 1970s. And it's that feeling that you have occasionally of like, maybe you're just getting away with it. Maybe you don't know, you don't really know what you're doing, and everyone else has got it nailed better than you, and you shouldn't really be there, and any minute you're going to get found out. And there's been quite a lot of studies around this. At some point in the last 50 years, it became rebranded from imposter phenomenon to imposter syndrome, making it sound like it's an actual medical condition that people can suffer from. And that has not been helpful for a lot of people, where it's actually, they've kind of internalized it, and it's become like, I've got this thing. So there have been lots and lots of studies around imposter phenomenon and what causes it, and what can help with it. One of the most effective, not treatments, but mitigations, if you like, of imposter phenomenon they found was as group conversations, group discussions of people who were all struggling with their own version of imposter phenomenon. And the conclusion was that actually hearing other people talk about their imposter phenomenon and the way that they felt about they were imposter in their role was really helpful to people. Okay, I'm not the only person who feels like that. Now, there are also links with imposter phenomenon to actual things related to poor mental health. So if you suffer from anxiety, for example, you are likely to experience that in the form of some kind of imposter phenomenon. But I think it's helpful for us to try and separate that out, because that's a symptom of something else as opposed to it being a thing in and of itself. And by naming it, this imposter syndrome, and giving it a face, it can become quite strong, even if it's not connected to something else that's going on. So with it in mind, around the whole thing of like understanding that if it's happened to other people, that that was the most effective way of people being able to put their own imposter phenomenon in perspective. I just want to let you know that over 70% of people report experiencing imposter phenomenon at some point in their life, at some point in their career. Now, I don't know how good your maths is, but that's most people, right? So if you're feeling these things, then that's normal. The fact that it's got a name, and the fact that there are countless posts on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I know probably TikTok, I'm not on TikTok, but I imagine there's videos about imposter phenomenon. It doesn't make it a thing that is anything more than just the state of being human. And the state of being human, let's not forget, in a role which is new to you, In fact, I would go as far as to say that if you just become a manager very recently and you're not experiencing some kind of sense of imposter phenomenon, then either you've not quite worked out what's going on, or you're experiencing that kind of feeling where you don't know how bad you are at it. The chances are that there is definitely the feeling of imposter phenomenon when you first go into a new role, especially a new management role, is going to feel the chances are very high that you're going to experience that, and that is probably normal. And the reason it's normal is because you were made a manager because you're good at something else. Most people get promoted to manager because they're good at the job that they are then going to be managing people to do. And because, you know, they've got something about them, maybe, that makes people think they'd be good management material. But if that's an indefinable something, a lot of people do not get training in the skills you need to be a manager before you become a manager. Sometimes that happens as you go along, but some kind of imposter phenomenon, some kind of in feelings of, I am probably not good enough to do this job and I'm just getting away with it, are entirely normal when you're starting to do something that is completely different to what you've ever done before. And I'll go so far as, if you can harness that feeling, recognize it, that it's your brain telling you that you're slightly out of your comfort zone and you need to stretch yourself, it's a good thing. And let me tell you why. Some of you may come across a book called Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. If you've not come across it, I really recommend reading it. It's very, very readable. It's very it changed my perspective on quite a few things. Her main thesis is this, that all of us have a tendency towards fixed and growth mindsets in different ways. And let me explain what those two things are. A fixed mindset is that is a person, or is a mindset where you go, I'm good at this. That is a thing that I am good at. You have a sense that you have an ability or a capability in a certain area. And to a certain degree, that defines you. I recognize quite a lot of fixed mindset in my life. In the past, so for example, I'm a musician, and I play a number of different instruments to a certain point. I'm fortunate that I have a sort of natural ability to pick up an instrument. But the point at which I have to actually start practicing, completely lose interest. So I've started lots of things because I've got this fixed mindset of like, this is how good I am at this. I've also never been skiing because I don't think I'll be any good at it, and I'm too old to try it out. So, you know, fixed mindset is this thing. Now, the problem with having a fixed mindset is that it stops you making a fool. Well, the advantage is it stops you making a fool of yourself because you know what you're good at. The problem with it is that when you stop being good at the thing that you're good at, who are you? And having a fixed mindset is related to quite a lot of feelings of anxiety in the workplace because people identify themselves with what they're good at. The flip side of that is a growth mindset, where you see not being good at something as an opportunity to build and grow, and you see it as a challenge to be addressed and overcome, as opposed to a barrier. If you can adopt a growth mindset, and the book's great at talking about ways that you can start to do that, but even, to be honest, just knowing about it and recognizing it in yourself, I found incredibly powerful. That can really help with this imposter syndrome thing, because this whole idea that you don't know what you are doing, if you just append one word to the end of that sentence, you don't know what you're doing yet, suddenly becomes an entirely different way of thinking about it. So thinking about if you're feeling like you're experiencing imposter phenomenon, then you probably are, and probably so is everybody else around you. Try to think of it from the point of view of, this is your body telling you that you are in a place of potential growth, rather than this is your body telling you that you are in a something that you can't do. So just work on like flipping that mindset. And I'd also recommend, there's I'll I only remembered this just before the session, so I haven't had a chance to send Sue the link, but I will send the link. There was a great commencement speech by a woman called Reshma Saujani, where she talks about imposter syndrome, and she likens it to a fictional medical condition that was invented in the I think the 1800s called bicycle face, which was a way of trying to discourage women from riding bikes because it made them unattractive. And she did a great job of kind of taking this thing which has become kind of pseudo medicalized, and turning it into something faintly ridiculous, but also giving you some senses of how changing the way you approach it can help you think about it. We've got a chat. Let me just have a little thank you. That's the book. Sue's put the book in the chat. We've talked a little bit about the you needing to let go of the expertise, and part of the problem with needing to let go of your expertise is this idea of imposter syndrome. You were good at that. If you're not doing that anymore, who are you? And that's the fixed mindset at play. So now we're going to talk a little bit about motivation. I need to explain, there's not actually a stick emoji. So we've got a baguette. It was the closest I could find. It made me laugh, I'm sorry. So idea of motivation, and you hear about like the idea of carrot and stick, like how do you motivate people to do the things that they need to do? And I'm going to pull, there's two books here that I'd highly recommend this. One is Drive by Dan Pink, and the other one is it's called Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who is a Hungarian psychologist with a very hard to say name. And Drive pulls from a lot of the work in Flow anyway. But the idea here is this sense of in the early stages of our economy growing, you could motivate people primarily through extrinsic rewards, money rewards, the promise of money and more rewards, pizza. And this has become, as we've become a more advanced society, this has become less effective. And almost to the stage where money is once you reach a certain point, money becomes a demotivator. So Dan Pink talks about you need to pay enough to take money off the table, but after that point, it can become a bone of contention. So really, when people are no longer relying and are no longer in that place where they don't have enough money to pay their bills and put food on the table, once you're in the realms of disposable income, remember those days, then there'll be then it becomes more difficult to have to use money as a motivator for many people. Also, the way that you reward, extrinsic rewards can have significant impact on the way people feel about their work. So there was a study done. It's talked about in a lot more detail in I think in Drive, of students who are involved in puzzle solving societies, chess societies, math societies, that sort of thing. And some of the people who are involved in these puzzles, a small proportion of them were paid per problem that they solved. So something they do for love, they were then and as part of this study, they started being paid for the stuff they loved. And what happened was they started only doing easy puzzles. They stopped challenging themselves because they were getting paid piecemeal for each one of these things. So if they only did 6 easy puzzles, they get paid the same as if they did hard puzzles. And also at the end of the study, a bunch of people just stopped doing it. They weren't getting paid for it anymore. So why should they do it? So being paid for it, introducing money into the equation, changed their relationship with the things that they did. If you ever tried to bribe a child to do something, then you'll be aware of the fact that you're now always going to buy them a pack of Pokemon cards in order for doing that thing, for as long as they're interested in Pokemon cards, and they will never do it for free ever again. So there's something in that extrinsic reward which is useful up to a point, but it becomes it can become a demotivator over time. The So where does that leave us as managers if we're trying to motivate people? Well, to be honest, it's quite helpful because as managers, most of the time we don't have any input into the remuneration of our people. We have, we might be able to contribute towards whether they should, go into the bonus pot, or we might be able to do a bit of a, here's an Amazon voucher for a job well done type thing, but we can't really materially affect the amount that they get back. So when you think about other ways of motivating them, and this is where intrinsic motivation, so motivation to do your work for reasons other than what you are given for it, become really, really important. And there are three things that drive this intrinsic motivation, and they're part of what's called the theory of self-determination. So the first one of these is autonomy. So it's the idea that you get to make decisions about how you do your work. Now, and this is something as managers we can totally control. If you think about a job that you did well personally, and something that you're really, really proud of, chances are you had a high level of autonomy in doing that. You probably got to choose how you went about it. You may be given a strong steer by your manager or whoever was leading, but you were probably left to your own devices a bit. You probably had to solve a few problems yourself. You were probably given quite a bit of rope to do it the way that it felt right to you. Making decisions about how we do our work is a massive driver of job satisfaction, and if people have that, it's incredibly motivating. Also, people tend to remember and appreciate leaders who give them that autonomy. Now, not everybody is the same amount of autonomy. Won't be right for everybody. Some people need a little bit more guidance than others. And the kind of culture that you're in as an organization will sort of determine that. There's not, you can't have a great deal of autonomy in something where people have a very, very specific work pattern that needs to happen the same over and over again. Also, so I think it depends, but an appropriate degree of autonomy is a massive driver of job satisfaction and motivation, and something that you can directly influence as a leader. The next piece ties a little bit to what we talked about at the top about expertise, mastery, expertise, being really good at something. So if you give people the opportunity to be really good at something in a way that they get to choose, that's hugely powerful. Again, if you think about that piece of work that you did, where you had a high degree of autonomy, you were also probably doing something you were really good at or getting really good at. And this is where the concept of flow comes into it. And I do recommend the book. It's really, really good. He talks a lot about this idea that about when you get in that zone of productivity, quite a lot of the time, that's because you're in this very sort of like tight tension between the challenge and your capability. So you have a challenge, but it's not so much greater than your capability that you feel overwhelmed or demotivated by it. It's just enough of a challenge, and you know quite quickly whether you've got it right or not. So you can feel that you're learning and growing in that process. So autonomy and mastery, two huge pieces of this this puzzle of motivation. And then finally, it's purpose. It's this idea of being a part of something which is bigger than you. So whether that's part of the team that you are in or the purpose of the organization that you're driving for, but feeling that the role that you play in your job, in your work, is contributing to something greater than just you is also a motivator. So somebody being reliant on you doing a good job in order to be able to do a good job for them is more likely to make you do a good job. As managers, you can drive all three of these things. You can determine how much autonomy you give somebody over the way they do their work, whether you micromanage them or whether you completely let them go to town. There's somewhere in between. You can control that. Enabling them to be good at something is something you also have a degree of control over, partly by going, I don't know, what do you think? But also by maybe introducing them to things that they aren't aware of beforehand, if it's in the same area that you are at, or enabling them to go and do self-learning in order to get better at doing something. And you can help them build their purpose. Yes, you can't contribute, you can't change the company purpose to be something that is in line with their own personal values. You can't do that, but you could do something within, you can shape the way that the people that you manage work together. You can mold the way that you work with them in order to increase the level of purpose, the level of transparency, the level of interactivity and interaction that they can see between their work and the company delivering whatever it delivers. So autonomy, mastery, purpose. You can deliver these you can help create this in whatever your management style is. There are some teams that you need to be a little, lean a little bit more on the mastery, because you get people who are just really excited about learning new things. Maybe it's more difficult to give them that purpose angle. But having all three in mind, think of it as a triangle, and if one corner starts pulling too much, just think about how you can just tweak the others in order to. It takes time, it takes some skill, but thinking it in terms of these three things, rather than we need to pay them more money, because the likelihood of you being able to influence that is quite is often quite light. That's not to say that people don't like pizza. People do like pizza, and sometimes just buy them some pizza. This is the thing that nobody told me. This is the thing that I wasn't expecting. Being a manager takes loads of time, a lot more time than I thought it would, and that's why the not being an expert anymore is so important. Because if you remain the expert as the in your own, you hold on to all that expertise that you had in your previous role, you're not going to have the time to do the things that you need to do. Some of it is like, there are probably forms. I know there were at the very least you'll have some kind of appraisal process or performance management process or admin around holidays or something like that. There will be stuff that needs to be done that you maybe don't really have to do now, or at least you don't have to do in the same way. That's an unfortunate reality of being a manager in most businesses. As I said at the top, meetings are your job now. If you're sitting in a meeting going, I could be doing some work, then that's the mindset shift that you need to find a way to do, because I did that for ages. I was just sitting in meetings getting really furious about the fact that I wasn't able to go and do some work, not really appreciating that being in that meeting, representing my team in that meeting, understanding what was expected of my team in that meeting, that's my job now. And whatever I'm doing back at my desk is secondary to me leading that part, to me taking on that role. So working out what you need to continue doing from your old role as you go into being a manager is really, really important, because things do take time. Also, people are weird, but generally just people are weird, and it's kind of your job to negotiate that weirdness now. Every member of your team is going to be slightly different. Every member of your team is going to have different wants and needs and things that drive them and things that they hate. And you need to take the time to understand that. You need to take the time to work out what questions to ask about this particular person, especially when things start to get hard. If you're noticing that someone's performance is dropping off, and you need to have that conversation about performance, that's a lot easier if you understand something about their personal experience. If you understand something about the way they approach their work. If when the first time you learn that that person is neurodiverse, say, or has an ailing parent or whatever, the first time you do that is when you're trying to have a conversation about their performance. That can make things really, really difficult. So getting to know your people is important, and it takes time. So what I would say, if I had one rule that I have tried to stick to as much as possible during my time as a manager, after I was terrible at it to start with, but I still try and stick to it today. It's never cancel a one-to-one. I would say book in regular and frequent one-to-ones that are in the calendar with each of your team, and that is not your time to cancel. That is their time to cancel or move. If you absolutely have to, you're not able to make it for some reason, then you move it. You talk to them about it, and you move it and you put it in. You don't cancel it and book it in later. You move it and it's still in the calendar. It's the most important time for understanding those people, and you should not be talking for the whole thing. A one-to-one is not your opportunity to give them a bunch of work and then they trot off and do it. If you're talking for more than 25% of a one-to-one, then you need to work out how to get them to talk a little bit more. This is your opportunity to try and get to know them a little bit more, to try and understand how you can get the most out of them and how you can support them the best. So thinking about questions to ask, I don't know what you think is a great starting place, but anything along those places, if they've had something's not gone very well, then, and they say, what could I have done differently? How could I have made it go better? I don't know, what do you think? They know the answers to this stuff, but it's getting them to draw it out themselves. So I would say if there was one golden rule for starting to build relationships with your teams, never cancel a one-to-one, because it's not your time. So just through the last little bit, I want to talk a little bit about some tools, just some practical things that can be really, really helpful as you're starting to get into being a manager, that can just help to take the edge off some of this overwhelm. To start with, I would highly recommend, if you don't already have a system for managing your personal sort of task list and things like that, I'd highly recommend Getting Things Done by David Allen. It's basically my operating system. It's something that I've done for many years. I've looked at a few productivity methods. I think it's the most effective. I'm going to give you 2 tips from that book now that are super, super helpful when you become a new manager. One is keeping an agenda list. So an agenda list is a list of things you need to talk to somebody about. A list of things you need to talk to somebody about. And it's super helpful for you to do that and get your team to do that. So then you're not bombarding them with questions constantly. They're not bombarding you with, Google chats or, emails or whatever it happens to be. Obviously you can still have a conversation if you need to, but if there's just something you need to remember to talk to them about and it's not urgent, put it on the agenda list, and they could put it on their agenda list for you to talk about it at one-to-one. Then it becomes, you've then got an agenda for you one-to-one to start with, but also you're starting to develop a bit of a set some boundaries around what's an appropriate kind of interruption, if you like. Obviously, like someone comes to say, can I have 5 minutes and do a quick chat? Then you put things down and you listen to them. I mean, that's but if it's just, if you can get them into the habit of writing stuff down that they don't need to talk to you about immediately, so that they can catch up with it later, it's really helpful for your time management as much as it is for their time management. The little sister to the agenda list is a waiting for list, which is, as the name suggests, a list of things that other people are doing that you are waiting for. For me, the first couple of minutes of a conversation with, like, of one-to-one or other kind of meeting with a line report will probably be a bit of a combination of the agenda list and the waiting for list for both of us. So encourage them to do the same thing. If you've asked them to do something, and we'll talk about this, there is a session in a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, about delegation, where we'll talk about this in a bit more detail. But if you ask somebody to do something, and then you never ask for it, they'll learn pretty quickly that you don't mean it when you ask them to do something. So writing down something on a waiting for list and doing the follow-up is not only a reminder for you that you're waiting on something in order to be able to achieve something else, but it's a good way of making sure that you're building in that cadence of conversation around, okay, so I need to check in with Joe because they have not sent me that thing yet, and just or better, I need to check in with Joe that they're going to be okay to deliver this thing later this week for me. Because then it becomes a conversation about the stuff that is on their list, is on their list, and it's helping them to manage in a proactive fashion. So agenda lists and waiting for lists are two of a bunch of really, really useful tools and techniques in getting things done, but they're the two that I find particularly helpful for managing other people. The other thing that is worth considering, especially if you've got a team that's, if you've got 3 or more people, and especially if you're operating on a hybrid environment, although it doesn't have to be hybrid at all, but it's very, very useful for being in a hybrid environment. Daily huddles, meeting on a day, like a very short, snappy, 15 minutes every morning conversation with the team, and just and try and keep it to, you always try and keep it to time, keep to a very sharp agenda of how are you doing? Do you need any support? What are you up to today? What's getting in your way? What went well what's gone well since the last time we spoke? If you can do those 4 things in 15 minutes with your team every day, then you'll start to develop a rhythm to work and a transparency around the work that can save you an absolute ton of time elsewhere. I've seen teams who've adopted daily huddles doing that. How are you today? What's going on? What's getting in your way? What's gone well since the last time we spoke? Just doing that, they've lost hours worth of meetings about other stuff because they're dealing with things in the moment as opposed to it building up to when you need a meeting. So if you can build that kind of time and that kind of rhythm in, and that's a very, very fast overview of how to do that. It's something that you can spend a little bit more time getting into the nuts and bolts of how to do it. But those 3 things I found personally, and I've also seen in other people who I've worked with, transformative for the way you as a manager can find yourself the time that you need in order to do the work of managing, and grow yourself, because ultimately you've now got an opportunity to build your skills, grow your muscles, and work out where you want to go. But you do that through the success of other people at this point. And that is everything that I have for you today. Are there any questions, Sue?
Yes, they are. I've got a few. Thanks ever so much, Tim. It's a really informative session. For those of you that are with us this afternoon, I have put all the books that Tim has mentioned. I've written their titles and their authors in the webinar chat box. So before we end the webinar, it might be an idea just to have a look at those if you're interested. I can certainly recommend the Carol Dweck and the David Allen books, because they're my Bibles too, Tim. So some questions. So then, do you have any tips about stepping up into a managerial role from within the same team? This person's having difficulties dealing with preconceptions because they were part of the team and they're now stepping up into a managerial role.
That's a great question. It's a really thorny situation. I've been in that situation once before myself. I know people who've also done the same, been through the same thing. I've coached a few people who've been through that. It depends a little bit on what the relationship. My answer to that question depends a little bit on what the relationship in the team are like. So it can be particularly difficult, say, if you are now managing somebody else who went for that role and didn't get it. That can be really, really hard. I would say the best way to manage that is always to just get in front of it. I think what's going to be really interesting about that is there are going to be preconceptions about who you are because of the job you were doing before. There is literally no point in trying to be a different person. What you can do is demonstrate you have different priorities. And you can do that through some of the stuff that I mentioned earlier about like letting go of your expertise a little bit and trying to use some of that autonomy, mastery, purpose triangle to kind of understand the how to motivate people without telling them what to do. I guess that the problem with when you've been in the team and then you become the boss is that like they kind of go, well, why should I do what he says? Because he doesn't know anything more than I do. It's not your, but you're the one in the chair, right? And you're not the person. And it's no manager's job to know more than you are. You do. They've got a different job to you now. So I think there's. I think if there's only specific individual challenges, the only way of tackling those is head on. I think if you've got somebody who is kind of refusing to acknowledge that you should be the manager of the team, then that's a conversation. I would approach that using a very clear feedback model. So like with actual observations and actual examples of behavior. So if anyone who's not familiar with there's a great feedback model, which is you make an observation, which is, you know, a thing that definitely happened that like everyone would have seen, that isn't an interpretation. So it's not you were a bit funny with me the other day. It was you said this thing, these words. The impact that had, so how that made you feel. Again, not something that can be argued with. But you then have a little pause, and then you make a suggestion. So you said that the way that I was suggesting we went about delivering this project was stupid. That made me feel undermined in front of the team, and I felt quite disrespected. Bit of a pause. I'd suggest next time, if you've got concerns like that, maybe could you talk to me about them separately in person, and we can work it out, and maybe I can explain where I'm coming from a little bit better. It's if you can get into that sort of rhythm and giving feedback like that, then it's difficult for people. Don't always like it, but it's difficult to argue with it, and it doesn't turn into a he said she said. So if you've got very, very specific issues with individuals, I'd recommend going down that route. But from a point of view of just how do you step up, it's not your job to tell people what to do now. They all know their jobs. It's your job to make their jobs easier. And so if you can go about doing that in a way which doesn't feel like you're being the guy with the book writing down the, you know, what everyone's doing, the better. But also you don't have to be their friend, remember.
Yes, that professional distance, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So when I'm talking about getting to know somebody, you know, you don't need to be inviting them around for dinner, but you do sort of need to know what makes them tick and what are going to be good things to ask them to pick up and good ways to ask them to approach things, and you know, that sort of things.
Right, thank you. So this is a similar question, but from a different sort of context, really. So this is a new manager, a relatively new manager, but people in their team are always referring back to their old manager who's left the company. So the old, oh, well, when so-and-so was here, we did it like this. And the new manager wants to make changes and update processes, etc. So how can they move the team's mindset from always looking back to looking forward?
There's two ways of doing it. One is, well, they're not here anymore, so keep up. You know, and sometimes at a certain point you might have to do that, but it wouldn't be where I'd start. I think in situations like that, I think it's always seek first to understand. So, you know, well, we always used to do it like that. Great. Okay. How did that work? How did that work out? Was it good? Were there any problems with it? Because you know, maybe it doesn't need changing as much as you think, you know, or maybe it does, and they can't see another way around it. I think if there's, I mean, we're getting into process improvement now, which I could talk about for ages, and I'm not going to. I think if you want to change something that other people are happy with, you need a reason to change it apart from the fact that you want it to be different, at which point data is what you need to do, you know. So there's a, because then you're not necessarily saying, I want to get rid of Dave's process. It's more about over the last 2 months, we've missed deadlines consistently every week on this particular work stream. I'd like to explore how we can not do that. Has anyone got any ideas? And then maybe they'll pick through Dave's process and realize actually it's a bit flawed, or this bit's a bit hard. So wherever possible, it's not a bad rule for life generally, but it's certainly in situations like that, wherever possible, try and replace feelings with facts. Not all feelings can be replaced by facts, and that doesn't make them invalid, but if there are facts available, go for it.
The next question is all about accessibility and how accessible should somebody be as a manager, because they're finding it difficult. They've got an open door policy, and they're finding they're getting lots and lots of interruptions. So how can they manage that better, so that they can get on with their own work as well as managing others?
So I think I think you should be completely accessible. I don't think the answer to that problem is to be inaccessible. I think it's about controlling how and when you are accessible. So I would say things like daily huddles and the frequency of one-to-ones is key for that. So the team that I'm leading at the moment, I actually have 2 sets of one-to-ones with team members at the moment, where I have we have a daily huddle. I have a weekly tactical one-to-one. It's very, very short, just like, what have you got this week? What do you need? Type thing. And then we have a monthly longer one-to-one, which is focused on ongoing development. That said, I don't say that they can't talk to me at any point outside of those things, but most of you can then train people to understand what fits into which bucket. Most of the time, we speak every morning on the huddle, so the burning stuff will come out. Any kind of like icks about ongoing things will come out on a weekly basis, and then the broader career development related stuff hits the monthly one. If you're still getting people, WhatsApping you every 30 seconds, then you can manage it, and you can kind of use that feedback model to say, well, we've got so you asked me this in a way that was that interrupted what I was doing, and it feels like that could have waited until the morning when we were in the stand-up, or it feels like that could have been part of our one-to-one. What do you think? Or do you think that you needed to message me about that? And make it clear that you are there, available, but there are boundaries, and there are appropriate forums for different kinds of things.
Super, thank you. And then you alluded to this right at the beginning of your presentation, and the question is, how does somebody get management experience without being a manager? What can they do?
That's a great question. One of the things that I like, there's a difference between management and leadership. But if you're a good leader, you will be. Not all managers will be good leaders, but a good leader will probably be able to be a decent manager. And you can be a leader in anything, and it doesn't need to mean seniority. And the things that you need to be able to do in order to be a good leader around motivating people, respectfully managing their boundaries, and help you to do something. That could be anything from a social, sports or social thing that you do outside of work, to a work stream, the committee to organise a Christmas party, or the whatever, however you're, if there's a well-being working party or things like that. So getting involved in stuff like that where you have a degree of responsibility is a great way of learning how to influence people to achieve an end without having to have authority. Because to be perfectly honest, being a manager, when you've got the authority, it's so much easier not having to use it. If you can motivate your team to do stuff because they want to do it and you've convinced them it's the right thing to do, as opposed to go, because I said so, crack on. If you get to that point, there's something else going on, So putting yourself in situations where you need to learn to influence and organize will be great. They're great transferable skills. I was always the endorsement on my LinkedIn that means the most to me was the drummer from my old band endorsed me for people management skills, which, coming from a drummer, I don't know if you know many drummers, but that's high praise indeed.
Right. That's fantastic. Thank you. Just checking to see if we've got any more questions. Nothing else has come through, so I think we'll leave the webinar there. Thank you ever so much, Tim, again for sharing your knowledge with us. As Tim's mentioned, this is the first of 4 management skills webinars that Tim has developed for IIRSM, and they are aimed at new or developing managers. So do have a look at the website to see what other topics we're covering. I know delegation is one, but we've got them coming up every couple of months, so do have a look and sign up for them. So thank you for joining our webinar today. We hope to see you at the next one. The recording will be on the IIRSM Resource Hub, so you'll be able to catch up or recap anything in your own time. So we'll end the webinar here, so have a good rest of your day. Thanks again, Tim, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We'll hope to see you all very shortly. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.